Qualtrics is buying Press Ganey Forsta, who is a healthcare data giant, for 6.7 billion. That's an immense amount that would seem unthinkable for just data. I don't want to say just data. Obviously, there's a lot going on here, but essentially, that is what Qualtrics sees the value in. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think they see the value in the data, but I also think they see the value in the environment and this, I had this conversation with Bonnie Tinder last night at Raven Intel. We were talking about how the market sees data and how they value data. And they do value data, but they value the ability to acquire it on a regular basis in an easy fashion. They value the technology you have for analyzing it and the way you put it out from a storytelling perspective. I think that's what Press Granny has spent a lot of time doing.
Welcome to the HR Huddle podcast, presented by Sapient Insights Group, the ultimate resource for all things HR. It's time to get in the huddle.
Welcome to Spilling the Tea on HR Tech, where we focus on the hottest HR tech news everyone needs to know to be in the know. We break down the news of the week and help you make sense of what it means for our industry and how it can impact your organization. We're recording today on October 9th. How the heck did we get into October already? I know it's survey season, so the time just flies by. We say this at every event. Time just keeps going back so fast. But we're October 9th, 2025, and we're bringing you all the news that you can use this week. I'm your host, Stacey Harris, Chief Research Officer and Managing Partner for Sapient Insights Group, a research and advisory firm if you haven't worked with us previously. And joining me today for the conversation is our co-host, Cliff Stevenson, Director of Research and Principal Analyst for Sapient Insights Group. Cliff, what a week. I mean, we're still, I think, reeling from HR Tech, and that's been almost 3 weeks now at this point, right? So it's kind of crazy. I'm traveling this week. You're at home. You're going to be traveling next week, and then I'll be home. And we're both trying to get the full annual HR system survey white paper done. We are frantically in the process of looking at data and trying to get it into a format that is easier for everyone. But there's also a lot of stuff going on at the same time. It's kind of a crazy couple of weeks with regulations and with a little bit of people sort of moving around different positions, right? What else have we got this week?
Oh, we've got some M&A activity, and as you said, a lot of people movement, a lot of stories coming in. This may come as a surprise to some people. We're going to be talking about AI, but a lot of very interesting stories. If we've got time, we're going to even talk about contingent workforce management, some big names, a lot of stuff going on. And yeah, I think you're right. We're going to have to probably get a shared apartment in Las Vegas since we'll have the Sapient office there.
I know it is, and I mean, look, I've got a beautiful background
Yeah.
today. There's no doubt it's gorgeous. I think I'm in the Encore at next to the Wynn where the event is at that I'm at this week. But I will say it's a very long walk to the event, so it doesn't make it any easier when you're even in the hotel. And we've just been in Las Vegas a lot this day when I can like repeat I know what commercials are going to come up flashing, in all the road signs. I'm like, oh, I've been here. I now know all the commercials that are going on. But yeah, I mean, Vegas is beautiful. It's nice, and I did get out a little bit last night, and you definitely get some good food if you're going out with groups of people. So I had some really great food this week, but it is still Vegas. So
And I'm
yeah,
looking for the Sapient Insights Group ad to flash on the building behind
I
you.
know.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Kelly, if you're able to help us out with that.
I don't know if we can compete with I don't know. The Lane Asher, right? The official Olympia after party. Yeah, I can't compete with that. Sorry, guys.
Well, one thing we do compete with, and we are the best in the business, is our survey and our data, which, as Stacey mentioned, is coming out soon. The full report. We do have some already available for purchase, right?
Yes, we have 3 segments available for purchase. We have the HRMS section, we have the payroll section, and we have the emerging technology section. And I think it's an interesting conversation because we've had segments available previously. I think this is the first time they're fully baked. A lot of times we get like partials out, and I think everybody's still like all I ever get is, well, when's the full one going to come out? I'm like, oh, that makes me kind of feel good because we always wonder every year, like, should we be having this much content? And like it feels overwhelmed. Like it's kind of crazy, right? Like we realize that we're not idiots. We know that we're kind of crazy that we're put together, this 300-page paper every year. But I do think that for a lot of people, it is the ability to kind of look at how every application area is doing sort of in one view the ability to kind of flip back and forth and see things really makes a difference. And so, that's kind of nice, not to say that it gets any easier to do the work, but it's nice to know that people are actually, if they really do value the full paper and all of the sort of the connective tissue we put in between it, because that's what our research does so well, right?
Yeah, we talk about the cluster model within the paper, and people obviously are seeing that. The market responds to that because that's also how we approach these systems, not as standalone silos, but as an interconnected connection of different systems.
Yeah, and if everybody wants to be part of the launch of the paper, we are going to be doing our annual sort of post HR tech replay is a good way to think about it, but it's got a lot of newer stuff in it too. On October 30th, that will be a webinar that we're hosting in partnership with HR Executive Magazine. Cliff will be co-hosting it with me. We'll bring Tammy on for a little bit more. Some of you who may have gone to our distributors only session last week will get an update on some more details about what's happening in the market there. And then also over the last couple of weeks, you and I, and up until HR Tech, we'll be doing a lot of events where you can stop us, talk to us, have some conversations. So Cliff, just, next week you're going to be at Oracle World, so people should be looking for you there if they have any questions. And then in November, we'll be at several events in the Phoenix, Arizona area, as well as in New York and in Atlanta and in Las Vegas again. So, and in Barcelona. So like November feels as crazy as October is. November feels even more crazy. But I was at 2 events last week.
Yes.
So I think maybe we'll just kick off, if that makes sense, with the conversation about where we've been at the last 2 weeks, and then we can jump.
Tell me about what's been happening out there.
Yeah. So what's been happening out there? It is. Let me just say, first of all, if anybody thought compliance was boring, I'm going to disabuse them of that concern or worry right now. Our number one topic, and I know this sounds crazy, but is how we're handling compliance right now in the HR space. And I think part of this is that the reason it's been sort of our number one topic is, one, we're one of the few researchers, I think, who cover not just the practices of compliance management, but the technology and the tools people are using to manage that. And what we're seeing is that many business leaders who oversee compliance through either a shared service function or an employee relations function or a strategic function within the HR function, or just as part of an HR tech role, all of them are reassessing where they get their compliance information from, how much of that can be embedded in an AI automated agentic model. It is one of I think the first areas where we're seeing AI really make a difference for HR so they can do more strategic work. And so I had the great opportunity last week of attending Equifax's customer advisory board. Some of the largest companies in the world were at that event, here in the United States at least. And it was really nice to see sort of a mix of mid-market and enterprise organizations sort of talking about this same challenge. I will say that the completion of a 994 has not gone as easy as I thought it should be at this point in date. I mean, you and I talk about why are I-9 forms the big sticking point? But we know it's very highly regulated here in the United States. Even if you're in Europe or Asia and you're sort of hiring people who'll be doing work through your business, there's sort of forms and fill out there. Even if you're working internationally, there are similar types of forms for every international environment. The challenge is the idea of actually not just filling out that form, but the actual ability to see that person and verify that person. And one of the big conversations at the Equifax event was, how do I verify that the person who interviewed is going to be the same person who shows up for the job? That's more, I think, of a topic that we're seeing rise, not just out of the recruiting area, but in this compliance area, right? Than what I think people give it credit for. So it was a really great session. I gave it kind of an overview of where the market was at in AI. We did a word cloud there, like we had done up at HR Tech, on how excited or just what was their feelings about AI. And I was pleasantly surprised in this room of 25, maybe 30 sort of technical, but focused on compliance and shared services and strategic things within the HR function. Leaders all felt fairly optimistic and excited about AI. So I think, it just continues to prove out my point that HR is not afraid of AI, and they are jumping headfirst into it. They are being cautious around how it's used for the business, as they should be, because of the ramifications that it could have both financially as well as ethically for their organization. And so everyone was heavily excited about what AI could do, particularly in the compliance space there. I thought one really interesting conversation I had is, you and I talk a lot about bring your own AI and the how many employees are already using AI on their personal level to help them improve their own productivity. And we had a roundtable where I had Humana and there was a couple of other very large organizations, pharmaceutical organizations, and big organizations in the space. And many of them had locked down personal AI use, as probably makes most sense inside of their environments, not being able to access, not being able to put stuff into it in your environment. But what they said is that is difficult because many of their people have sort of built up a valuable personal professional processes in their own AI tools already. And that is exactly the conversation that, I had another one across the table, which was a smaller organization, said, I think we would just, we wouldn't, I wouldn't be able to function if they took away my AI at this point, right? In that fashion. And so, that restriction of AI inside the company is going to become a big conversation. So it was a really good event. It was in Scottsdale. They did a whole cowboy theme thing, which was very cool. So I got a couple of pictures I'll probably post with me in a cowboy hat, which is not my usual, but I do love a good cowboy hat. Didn't get any cowboy boots, but I got a good cowboy hat. But their senior leadership, I think, which is really nice to see over there, at the whole team, Chad and the group that had brought me on to have the conversation, they're very vested in doing what's right by their customers and in tying together the very valuable tools that they have at Equifax that actually help the whole world sort of understand sort of what's happening on a hiring front through sort of the sort of verification of who that person is and their background. And we had a lot of conversations with that leadership team about the value of the data in light of what's not going to be coming out of the Bureau of Labor Statistic right now.
Mm-hmm.
Where do we get our valid workforce information from? I think, as much as it feels cringy is not quite the right word, but somewhat. I mean, we all have a kind of a reaction to credit bureaus, right? Like we love them when we need them and we hate them when they're stopping us from doing things we want to do. But I do think that they are one of the few places where there's a large amount of data to tap into that is more accurate than what we can see possibly coming out of some of the other government entities. And so that was some of the conversation we're having as well. So really good, a lot of focus on making compliance easier and connected, and some very interesting AI assistant sort of capabilities that they're already starting to build into that technology, nudging people when compliance comes forward. The other thing that I'm at this week this is why I'm in Vegas, is I'm at the Dayforce Users Conference this week. And that's been interesting because I talked a little bit a few months ago when I had went to do their leadership session that they had for enterprise organizations. Now we got a chance to talk to all of their customers here and to be part of their analyst event where they get to give us an update. There's something about founder energy when you still have a founder in an organization, and David Ossip, who is the founder of what is Dayforce, not the original Ceridian, but what was Dayforce product. He's up there with, jumping into cheesy noodle pools that are for his customer craft to get a good picture, of craft noodle, things. He's giving out pins and Labubus, which, by the way, am I saying that correct, Cliff?
I think so. I mean, you don't have kids.
Right? Like
but I've heard the word Labubu. Yeah, I think this is the first time you've pronounced something correctly.
Pins and things for people for making work, for the idea of making work better, letting you do the work that you were meant to do, which is their big saying. Every time you sort of talk about that, everyone's very excited about it. But the big thing was he opened his jacket up and he's like, I've got special Labubus for those who have really do. It's got little t-shirts on them that say doing the work you were meant to do. That was funny and it was just great. It was good to get someone who kind of can laugh a little bit at themselves. And I think, that energy of the focus on, I love the customers. I want to do what the customers need. Not that non-founders don't have that, but there's just something different about a founders and their energy around that. And David definitely, it starts there. One of the comments he made, which I thought was really powerful, was, we see you and we hear you, and we're focusing on your problems. And they really are very internally focused. Now, they've always been good at that. David's got a big brand of that, but they have a president, Steve, who's really great, very focused on the practical aspects of getting things executed inside of Dayforce now. And him and his team of the new product people were really giving us a sense of how they were taking AI inside of that organization with a very people plus AI approach. Joe, their head of product, was very much, even when he was asked, like, what do you see as the most emerging conversation happening in AI over the next year? He said, look, there's a lot of really cool stuff, but none of it happens without people in the mix. So that was really powerful. So a couple of things that they announced this week, which I think everyone should be aware of. They've got a new compliance AI assist tool that I think is very, very powerful. The room erupted in cheers when they came out with that, which is
Wow.
going to have all of the compliance work because they've got their own compliance department in their managed services function here at Dayforce. They're now going to sort of create, again, a more AI nudge factor focus on that. One of my favorite things, which I saw a few months ago, is their workspace environment, their AI workspace environment. That is basically a collaborative environment where you can bring anything into it, both from the Dayforce environment to external things, and have people collaborate on it and actually take actions with agents. And it uses AI to bring up the information, the summaries, the tools, the information. It's a really powerful space. We know a couple of organizations are trying to get their like Workday with the recent acquisition with Asana. I haven't seen anybody do it quite as effectively in the HR environment as they did. And it's already, it's going to be out, I think, by like first quarter of next year, they're talking about, but it's already in beta. There are people sort of testing it out, which was really powerful to see. The other thing that is also, I think, an important news point, which we had missed, they did a small acquisition of a strategic workforce planning solution called Agent Noon, which is now going to be part of the Dayforce package. And really interesting there is that I went in. It reminds me a little bit, for those who kind of know like the OrgView product. It's a organization modeling and analysis tool, but it also includes a lot of financial analysis. It also includes a lot of sort of regional lookups. It includes a lot of I'm going to put it together and then AI is going to sort of extrapolate it out kind of modeling, right? That was really, really powerful. I had not seen that connected to what Dayforce had done before. I think it was a very good pickup for them because it's a good product. And the thing that Dayforce does, they are a single content model. They're buying the engine on that, and they will re-platform it to fit into their entire, so that the data is all in one place. It's one of the big promises that David and Joe and Josh, the product team, are making there. I also got to sit and talk to their head of AI, David, who is kind of cool and a little bit on that weird fence of sort of like, I use AI every day, but here's the limitations that we've got to be aware of in the market, which I always love to hear that. And like AI forward people who have also really good awareness of its possible risks and challenges. So they're not just gung ho on it. And he's definitely one who's got both feet on both sides of that ground. I do think what I would say is, from my perspective right now, is that Dayforce has the clearest and most, I'd say, simplified for the buyers AI messaging right now out of the other HRMS sort of run sort of entities these days, and maybe even more than the ERPs. I don't know. Their customers are using a lot of AI and may not even realize it. They're very focused on the right tool for the right thing and getting outcomes. So it's been a positive week here. I know it's a lot to take in, that I've got two events that I'm covering right now, but I think there's a lot of good things here that are happening. Ceridian's been kind of quiet. They were just acquired by or went through their acquisition for private equity firm with Thoma Bravo that they're in the process of still. We will expect that will change some of their service levels, but they are going to continue to manage services, which I think is unique for that enterprise level that they're moving up to. So lots of good updates. I'll have more. I'll do a write-up that everyone can access to on LinkedIn. So Cliff, sorry, I know it was a lot, but it's a lot of things that we're seeing. Where else do we have to talk about today, though? So, because I know we got to get through so much information,
Well, you
right?
mentioned the Dayforce buyout
Yeah.
through Thoma Bravo. So we've got one that's just big. It's not as big as Labubu's.
Yeah.
I appreciate the sort of SEO that you're bringing just by mentioning them,
Yes.
especially this close to Christmas. If the
Exactly.
corporation wants to sponsor us, we're willing to do a collab.
Yeah.
But he was probably, I believe, the biggest number
Uh-huh.
acquisition. I know that some of the ones we've covered, we don't know the full amounts yet, but I believe this will probably top the charts. Qualtrics, who we cover in our report, is buying Press Ganey Forsta, who is a healthcare data giant, for 6.7 billion. Stacey, we could go into a lot of detail, but I think you summed it up best with just your subject line when you said data runs the world. We were sort of speed rounding through some of this, but I don't know much more to be said. That's an immense amount that would seem unthinkable for just data. I don't want to say just data. Obviously, there's a lot going on here, but essentially, that is what Qualtrics sees the value in. Do you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I think they see the value in the data, but I also think they see the value in the environment I had this conversation with Bonnie Tinder last night at Raven Intel. We were talking about how the market sees data and how they value data. And they do value data, but they value the ability to acquire it on a regular basis in an easy fashion. They value the technology you have for analyzing it and the way you put it out from a storytelling perspective. I think that's what Press Ganey has spent a lot of time doing. And so I think, it seems like it's kind of crazy, but when you think about healthcare and the benchmarking that they do, this is benchmarking stuff that's so critical to people living and dying, right?
Mhm.
And I know when I have family members who have been in the hospital, I can remember taking surveys about our experience, and because it's a big part of the research model of hospitals, all run through Qualtrics. This doesn't surprise me at all because my bet is that a lot of the data that Press Ganey is sort of working with comes through the Qualtrics environment, right? So I think this is a partnership that makes complete sense. What I also think is interesting is that, just as a note on a connectivity, there was a small company that came and helped us with a little bit of our analysis the first year it came to Sapient Insights because we didn't have the team built up yet, who was in the process of having their data and their research process sort of acquired by the Press Ganey firm. And so
Oh,
a little bit, yeah, I don't know if any of the team members who were there who moved over are still going to be in that process, but it was kind of a 5 years ago. We were slightly connected to that organization because of the good research that they did, and we were looking for people to help us with our analysis work until we could hire a full staff, as we've now done an amazing job. But I do think this is worth watching because what was it that made it different? We do know data is worth something, but it is how you access that data, how you're using that data, and how you're portraying that data that is as valuable as well. And what the financials you're already making off that data before a company will invest like this. Qualtrics is really, really focused on getting better at employee feedback, and the focus that they have here, I think, will be let's figure out how the things that they do at Press Ganey fold into what we do on a services level. So I expect we'll see a lot of that. There's also a lot of AI conversation they have here in this dialogue, and maybe speeding up both Press Ganey's process as well as what's going on at Qualtrics. So this is exciting. I love anything that has to do with data, but it's a huge number. You're right, right?
yeah. And amazing. And it's also interesting because, a big part of this was the healthcare vertical, right? And healthcare and frontline workers has become probably just as ubiquitous of topics that we talk about as AI has been. And that actually leads into another acquisition that we touched on last episode as we were going through everything in HR tech. I sort of, we were really going through quickly, but I mentioned Radency had acquired my interview. This was a few weeks ago, but my interview is a AI assistant. So, you would do your interview through the AI assistant and be able to do all that. It's especially appealing to frontline workers, obviously people that are comfortable with that technology, possibly, the younger cohort. But the idea being that, you kind of have your personalized view of the recruiting process, right? Of the recruiting journey. One of the most common complaints of anyone going through a hiring process is just being ghosted, right? Someone just leaving and never hearing back. And you wouldn't have that
It's
issue.
a huge issue for people, right? Like big, and they have no idea how much it impacts their brand when that happens, right?
Yeah, exactly. It really is this idea of tying people in. And you mentioned earlier that we think of a lot of fear of AI because of things like job loss, but
Yeah.
then we also got to remember that there's so many areas of improvement that we could be using it for that people are very excited about. And Radency sees it the same way, or they wouldn't have made such a large
Yeah,
acquisition.
we're just a shout out. Bradency got a really good, I guess, review is a good way to put it, from one of our customers and one of our friends who were at the HR Tech conference, and how they were handling the assessment tool that they were integrating into their processes. I think interestingly here, any AI generated interviewer will be held probably more aligned with an assessment tool versus a human doing the interview. So keep that in mind as you're thinking through this. I'm assuming Radency is using the same level of rigor here as they do with some of their other tools. So we'll find out more about that hopefully in some upcoming briefings.
Yeah. And then you mentioned compliance earlier,
Yeah.
and we talked about, I-9 compliance, but it's the EU really has had some of the, they've been setting the bar, honestly, for compliance in the last few years, and their new pay transparency laws have gone into effect in September, and that has triggered a wave of new processes, updates, and in this case, partnerships. PayScale and Trusaic started a strategic partnership to help navigate this, right? So to make sure that you have anyone within an affected EU state. So keep in mind, they don't have to live there, but in some way their pay is attached to that state, right? Ex-English citizen, whatever the case may be. Well, actually, not the English, sorry, French. Sorry, English. This is what would help. We're going to see another one very similar to this, but pretty interesting because, this EU Pay Transparency Directive, as it's formally called, really has to do with not where the organization is or offices are, but specifically the person's contact and the person's, not residency, but I guess more or less, are they somehow affiliated? So it really has a larger effect than I think people realize. And hence we're starting to see these changes to these technologies, right?
Yeah, this doesn't surprise me at all. I think, and when you think about global pay, the amount of complexity that's happening here, Lincoln, who's a good friend of ours, I think we'll be talking a little bit about her later. She really has delved into this heavily. All I can say is that, I think regulations in Europe have allowed their medium and small businesses and even some of their enterprises to move faster with AI because they were clear on what they could and could not do. This pay transparency is part of that conversation, right? That idea that we just know what's happening in our market. Others would disagree with me. I've seen that with some of the people who are actually in Europe who feel like they're farther behind. But I think, a lot of people, they hear the hype coming out of the United States and a few of the top people. They don't hear the plethora of organizations who are not there yet. But I do think that, pay transparency is also another thing where it feels like the regulations are going to make it so hard to do what needs to be done inside of Europe, but it may end up sort of prodding the rest of the world to sort of do more. And that's always a positive, right?
Yeah. Another company, Workday, might have heard of them, also has launched a pay transparency solution powered by Kainos. I'm not sure on that pronunciation. Please let us know. But yeah, same idea. And, they make some points in there as well that it goes beyond just making sure that you're compliant, but also helps you prepare for audits or communicate with your employees about what's going on and what those changes are. All key factors. We think of it as just compliance, like, yeah, that's just the rules. No, there's everything that goes along with it, right? You have to change your processes. You have to communicate this to employees. You have to educate your people.
And when they're a little squishy, like some of these are, I know like in North Carolina, we have the same issue with contract workers, and it's squishy, depends on sort of how you kind of work that. That means someone will probably end up having to get an audit, and then they're going to have to probably show all their paperwork. And then they might even get a small fee, which again is part of the process here, is that as you're learning, what you can and can't do. The first people to get through the audit process will have the hardest time. So having those services are critical, right?
Yep. And speaking of Workday and some more, outside of the U.S. news, Workday is expanding into the Middle East, opening a new office in Dubai as part of starting there through the UAE and ideally through the rest of the Middle East. You are the resident Workday expert. Tell us what you know about. Spill some tea.
I mean, it doesn't surprise me that Workday is expanding their global capabilities. That is where the growth is. That is where the money's going to be at in the market, right? I think there's been a long-standing understanding that certain regions, certain countries who sort of handle things differently from what we're used to here in the United States, from a sort of a women's rights, a human rights code of conversation, oftentimes are left just off the list. You don't want to deal with that. The sort of blanket work sort of in the Middle East brings in a lot of countries that oftentimes fall into that category, right? Just to be sort of honest about where the market is at. We all know this. We have some people who will not work with China for that reason. Some people who will not work with Russia for that reason. I mean, everybody has their own sort of ethical sort of lines at which they draw for who they'll work with and how they'll work with them. And some people we know won't work with the U.S. for those reasons, right? Like it is not a one-way street. But so Workday had a couple of I think organization countries that maybe were on that sort of no-touch list that fall in the Middle East area. I think some of that sounds like it might be changing, right? And I don't think bad or good. I think, one, the world is globally changing. The market is changing. The ability to maybe make an impact by doing something good is another thing people are starting to look at, right? Is that sometimes just staying away doesn't always help, doesn't make it get any better. Maybe part of being a part of it makes it better, right? We've always had that conversation here. I do know that the Middle East has been a huge, huge boon for Oracle and their HCM organizations, and particularly going into Africa. I think that is going to be a battle between them and Workday if Workday really is going to go after that market with a big announcement and a lot of focus. And then I even had that conversation here with the Dayforce team. Like, do you do, payroll in the Middle East? They have partners who do, like they've got about, I think the number we were given at the analyst event was 38 native payrolls, was 20 native payrolls. And the number I was sort of tangentially given, but maybe not for sure on the record, was because they didn't know if it was the exact number, but they were closer to 38 native payrolls. And native payrolls means you have localized down to that local level. You've got a local tax engine. You've got a local ability you have people on the ground who can actually do things with the local governments. It's a much more sort of difficult thing for companies to do, to have a native payroll. What most of the organizations do who are doing payroll internationally is they have a hub where your data can get rolled up into, but that data is coming through a local entity that's doing payroll on the local ground with a local tax engine. it's keeping these updated and working with the local entities. So, and Middle East and Africa have been two of the hardest regions to do that in. So again, I think, one, this goes to Workday's expansion globally. Two, this goes to their focus on sort of that we are the world's sort of HR and payroll system conversation that they're having right now in the market. And I've watched more of this, I think we'll see, right?
Absolutely. Speaking of sort of larger companies and changing things around, UKG went through a big rebrand. This was one that I was itching to talk about because we were under NDA until after that. But we went through it and took a look. Some of you may have already seen it. They did a very large campaign. Yeah. The when work works, everything works, which I think is the most you can say work in one sentence. It's very interesting. So you'll notice, if you're just sort of following from the outside, you'll probably see that the UKG logo that you might have seen on golf shirts or anything else that they brand won't have the little smiling face. The K will now be separated. Someone else told me it kind of looks like the elbow bump that people were doing during COVID. I thought that was cute.
That's not a cute way of thinking about it. I hadn't put those two together. Yeah.
And I just want to shout out Jen Braffman, who works over there, is a phenomenal leader and just wonderful. She was kind enough to sort of text me during the rebrand and answer questions because I was like, well, people want to know, is everything else staying the same? The product names are staying the same. And usually you probably don't need to worry too much. There won't be any change to the platform. There's a lot more focus, though, on here's the word, frontline workers, right? They really want to focus, obviously, on AI and really bring in things that are affecting frontline workers, things like burnout and, being able to find the talent and just kind of helping deal with this really severe shortages that we're having and the effects it's having on frontline workers. Kind of a renewed focus on that. And I think they want to make sure that people sort of associate them with that. I think it was said that some people thought that they made a sporting apparel because they do so much
sport work. I know.
Work
so much sponsoring of really positive. And a lot of, because I think didn't they sponsor, I think it was the women's soccer league, wasn't it, Cliff, they had sponsored, right? Which was a really powerful thing.
Yep.
Yeah. One of the things I will say about the rebrand, and rebrands are always fun, and Dayforce did a rebrand about a year ago, so we were seeing some of their updated day brands here, work data on their rebrand as well. We've seen a lot of them. And then I think the colors are similar for UKG. They didn't go too far off of their original colors, so they don't have to maybe remake all of their color signs. But it usually marks also a note for that they are shifting their focus on things in the market, like you said, frontline worker. I think for them, this idea of what makes work is the idea that they are a very practical, focused solution that is focused on how you're going to get the most out of your work environment. And that is something we're hearing from a lot of organizations right now. Not that people first isn't sort of the direction but I think part of what we're seeing is that as much as I want to focus on people and their engagement and their excitement about what they're doing, if it's hard to just get an email or open a file or figure out where you save things or figure out where the information is at, that makes your work life very difficult. And so a lot of this conversation is about how we streamline the work process so that you can actually have more fun and be engaged at work. And I saw the same conversation over at Dayforce too, but I think the UKG conversation is at a much more sort of global level for a lot of the work that they're doing, right? And so I'm excited to see this. I think Jennifer always does an amazing job in the work that she's doing here. What is the opportunity, I think, is how many people can now go back four brands ago to the original Ultimate logo material and swag. So that may be the call out for them as they're going through all of it. Yeah.
I still have my old trust card from Scott and all those were there. So I know that we're kind of running up on time, but I really want to spend some time on these, even if it means that we don't cover some of the broader stories, because this is full disclosure for our listeners and viewers. The next few people we're going to talk about, I would consider good friends of ours, and I don't want to give them short shrift. We've got some new positions that you mentioned, a lot of that, and new companies, just really cool stuff. So let's first talk about Brandy Pond, just a wonderful human, but also being recognized as she is now the Vice President of Executive Programs and the Chief of Staff to the Chief Revenue Officer for Americas at Cornerstone On Demand. So this is really wonderful. And I know, Stacey, she specifically called you out in a positive way. I don't mean like called you out, but said, praised you for your help in all of this. This was probably Also, I guess under NDA until recently, but can you tell a little bit about that process?
It was, yeah. So some people who know Brandy Pond might know her from her work early on in the days. She's been an analyst. She was early on an analyst relations role at Workday. That's how most of us. But she had previously been in sort of similar, I would say, senior level roles, doing a lot of focus on sort of engineering from the sales and the development side for product with Intuit. She's got a huge background. She's worked at SAP in the past as well. So long-standing sort of tangential role in the HR space, but she was at Workday for, I want to say, maybe 7 or 8 years. I'm not sure how long, but there she went on to be the chief of staff for David Summers, who was the head of product, chief product over there for multiple years. And so I think part of what it's been nice to see this transition for Brandy is moving from very much sort of a back office role where she's helping the market sort of grow through that to a little bit more of a prominent role in the market, right? Because she's having such an impact on a lot of organizations. She is, I will, again, clear disclosure, she's a very dear friend of mine. We got to know each other very well when we were working together when she was in analyst relations. And I was just coming out of dealing with my own personal grief when my husband passed, and she had gotten into her new role. And she was one of the few people who kind of saw some of the pain I was going through behind trying to just do the work that I was doing, and was really, I think, great in helping me say, yes, you can get the work done, but let's give you some space to do what you needed to do. Not everybody sees that. It's a hard thing to see when you're someone like me who's a little bit more private about things. And so that, I think, bonded for us a very strong relationship. I'm excited to see what she does. I think Cornerstone is one of those organizations that's right at a tipping point where they could, skyrocket off with some really cool focus on not just the idea of where we're thinking about learning and skills, but the whole idea about how work connects to us as a human being who needs constant development and growth, right? And in that constant development and growth, which is the future of what we want AI to really be able to do, is give us room for that. Can you create a very connected environment that connects your skills to your outcomes, to your business goals, to sort of the making HR really the promise that it's wanted to be for many years. So I'm excited to see what she does here. We'll keep an eye on this. And there's a lot of good people, I think, who are out in the market right now. If you are interested, just to let us know. That was just me making one email and saying, hey, I think you should talk to this person. I think they'd be great. That's how that started. So yeah.
Sometimes it's all it takes. And for those of you that are watching on video, it's just, I need to dust in here. I don't know why I'm watering like that, so just ignore that. For those of you just listening, you didn't hear anything. We're also going to mention another good friend, Richard Rose now, who will be leaving One Model and is co-founding Icona. We got that pronunciation from him. That's Ikona. So think like the Hawaiian town Kona with I at the beginning. That's easy. He will be the co-founder and the chief product officer. The idea of Icona is that he's really just trying to get this idea of cultural change that happens through people analytics, right? He sees that there's a lot of power in people analytics, but there's been a problem sort of connecting the dots, and that's what Icona set out to do. Sort of, getting that executive buy-in, deciding what actions actually take place when you see that data, right? What are you supposed to do about it? And how does that affect the culture? How do you create a data-driven culture? He specifically asked us to shout out Ian O'Keefe, the founder and CEO, and he's been working with Bennett Voorhees, perfect for spooky season for anyone who gets that connection, who is the chief technical officer. And, Richard's great. Say some nice things that don't make me cry.
Oh, well, yeah, no. I mean, Richard kind of, at least for me, I mean, he was in the analytics world for a long time, but 2 years maybe ago, and now at this point, kind of just burst on the scene on LinkedIn as just someone who was so passionate about connecting people, right? And I got to know him. I'm like, oh, wow, who is this guy who's, first of all, living in Pennsylvania, which is a big thing for me because my family is from the PA world. And so he understood the word yuns and some of the writings. I was like, all right, you know what yuns means, then maybe, this guy's okay. I think he's moving now, possibly. But this is one of those announcements that I had a little bit of a sneak peek on. We had some conversations about what he was doing. One Model, I think he's really standing behind them and going to continue to support the work they're doing. Definitely feels that about. I think he just wanted to kind of own, similar to when I went out on my own with my partners here, Susan and Terry. I wanted to own my own destiny, right? That's a big driver on some of this, right? Especially he's done such an amazing job building a community of people and helping them think about how analytics can work. And he's right. That last mile of transformation is usually the hardest. The idea of how we connect the business to the outcomes and make sure that it's not just a project or piece of technology, but it's a way we actually run our business going forward. So I'm excited to see what he does. It's going to be a mix of services and tech, which I think is an interesting play. We're going to support him as much as we can. It's a great, they're already starting to work with some very large companies in the work that they're doing. But if you haven't been connected to Richard Rose, I don't know where you're at. You're obviously not on LinkedIn because he is got one of the largest followings on LinkedIn in the market around here. But I would definitely recommend connecting with him and staying abreast of what the work that he's doing. So yeah, I think make you cry. It was all good stuff, right, Cliff?
No, it's all good. Perfect. So you mentioned Oracle before when you were talking about Workday and Oracle sort of competing for that Middle East share. Oracle also had some big news. Clay McGuirk and Mike Cecilia are going to be the co-CEOs. McGuirk had come from cloud infrastructure, heading that up, and Mike Cecilia was the head of industries for Oracle. And they've really been in the news a lot lately, right? We're hearing about them buying media companies, huge partnerships with OpenAI and the data centers and all of that things going on. But I think it shouldn't be forgotten, and I want to do a little shout out here to Rebecca Wetterman from Nucleus, who sort of, flagged this as we shouldn't forget about just how we got to this point, and that was through the leadership of Safra Katz. And think about how big they are and how much she oversaw. And again, this isn't like she's going away. She's going to be the co-vice chair of the board of directors. So her leadership will stay intact. If anything, it'll kind of go to that next level, but definitely want to make sure she's not forgotten in this discussion.
Yeah, no, I've always thought Safra's sort of a quiet, I think, entity behind, sort of a lot. Larry, it's a little bit more verbose and out there as the Oracle sort of founder kind of concept. But I mean, Safra's always, I think, been very focused on financials and the business outcomes and those kind of things. So, and I don't think, someone made a point that this is the first, I don't know if it's a quarter, or it could be just I don't know exactly what it is, so don't quote me on that particular thing, but that Oracle is at a point where they're spending more than they're making, which is not unusual for businesses in different quarters, right? But part of that is this AI investment that they've already starting to do that kind of buying up the land, buying up the amount of sort of money that they've gotten that contract with OpenAI is sort of mind-boggling for those servers. So it's not surprising that it is their cloud infrastructure person. And I can't believe you could say Clay's name as well as you did, Cliff. You must have really done your homework on that. We've had the opportunity to see Clay and Mike and present at Oracle events, at innovation sessions and stuff. And so, I mean, I think this is a really powerful opportunity, I think, to sort of see how this market is shifting right beneath our feet on some level, with not just a lot of the founders, the people who sort of got us here, taking a step back and saying, okay, now I want someone new to handle this next phase, but also with the idea that, a lot of these businesses are not just trying to build something today, they're trying to build something that will be the most valuable in like 5 and 10 years. And that's a hard place to be at when everything's run on your stock options right now, right? So
Absolutely. And you're talking about that sort of next stage, right? The next phase. I see a lot of that in Cornerstone's new appointments. They just announced that Gunajin Yaraman will be the chief AI officer and Himanshu Baxi as the chief development officer. Continuing this trend, the chief AI officer, title that did not appear, I believe, until about 3 years ago, or maybe less. And now we're just seeing it across the board, and very impressive backgrounds, a lot of time at Google, Amazon. I believe both of them have had time at Amazon, specifically in search, that very customer-facing backgrounds, very impressive backgrounds, and I think helps Cornerstone really help develop what they're trying to do, because with Galaxy and everything else, it is so AI focused there.
Very AI focused. I had a chance to meet Himanshu Baxi while I was at HR Tech. Very impressive with his background, his experience. I think we're going to see a lot of execution come out of these two, which is the focus for Himanshu on that. And yes, it is Himanshu and Himanshu. I think they call him Baxi is the thing, but I'm not positive on that. I was one of those moments where I was like, wait a minute, there's two Himanshus sitting at a table with me. But this is a good move, I think, for Cornerstone. We're definitely, Karthik is still leading up sort of a lot of that vision of where they're heading with that. But a lot of times when it comes to this work, there's just so much execution work that needs to be done. And that's what we're seeing a lot of these organizations backfills all that execution roles, right?
Yeah. And speaking of execution, our last people news, Chris Kickless is going to be the GVP and general manager at UKG Ready. Again, the titles aren't changing at UKG in terms of products. It is truly a rebrand in that exercise. So that will remain the same, but he'll be obviously a large part of that renewed focus, or I should say possibly even new focus on that sort of getting the job done aspect of UKG Ready.
Yeah, Chris, I got to sit next to at the last UKG analyst event. First of all, we should note that Chris, me, Cliff, there's a few of us that have a bit of a geeky side where we know what
Really?
Firefly is. If you don't know that, it's not an AI tool. It's an actual movie and show, right? Got to talk to him a little bit about that. I got to talk to him about D&D and what that means to a certain generation of us and geekiness level, right? But outside of that, Chris is just a really good human being. And he's been on the working with the UKG Ready product for so many years. I think it was my first sort of connection with him is when all the analysts kind of had this conversation with the UKG team to say when they were sort of saying, well, UKG Ready is just for like 500 below. And we're like, look, no, we see customers who are a lot bigger on your product. And it allowed them, I think, to rethink the value proposition of that UKG Ready product they had. Connected with what was going on with UKG Pro. And so it's good to see him get some attention here. Good to see them sort of elevate that role. The UKG Ready is a product that we come up often in our research, and you'll see more about it this year in the awards programs, right?
Wonderful. Well, normally I think you're the one with the tight schedule, but today it's me. But there are a number of different really cool stories, and I'll set links to them as we do in the LinkedIn posts and in the YouTube posts. A lot of this is things you've heard us talk about, sort of backed by external research, as you were talking before. A lot about how AI is being used in the workplace. Just as we saw, a lot of people are using it sort of personal tasks. We also seeing something about a little more about OpenAI's movement into the job board space and what may be driving that, the effect that layoffs have on people in terms of their productivity and their mindset, all things we've talked about before, but that we're seeing more and more sort of external research aligning with our own and going into depth in some of these stories. So if that's something you're interested in, we can talk about that more next time, or write us on when we post this up on LinkedIn, or just directly reach out to us and we'll be more than happy to discuss these things further.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of key things here, like Deloitte's having to partially refund the Australian government that we won't get to chat about, which you and I really want to, but we'll get to it next week. We promise you guys that none of this is going to go away because I think there's so much news going on. So I appreciate you giving us space to have some of the extra conversations. Cliff, I'm going to wrap us up here so you can get on to your next call. Thank you everyone for joining us as we wrap today. Just a couple of big pushes. The annual HR System Survey white paper will be out and October 31st. Be sure to be there, be at our event and join the conversation. We love it. I think you're going to find some really interesting new stuff this year. Also, be sure to listen to our sister HR Huddle podcast, HR We Have a Problem, hosted by our CEO, Terry Zipper. And if you like these huddle environments, please make sure to go to Work to find where our environment is at and make some comments or like them, which just make sure that things stay at the top level where they need to be seen at. Stay up to date with immediate breaking HR tech news and to get all the behind the scenes content, you can follow us at Sapient Insights on LinkedIn and on Instagram. You can follow me and Cliff as well on LinkedIn. We always love that. You get to hear my written updates on some of these events. Thanks, Cliff, for all that you're doing, pulling all this together. We really, really appreciate it. Thanks to our production team, including Brand Method Media Group, who helps us produce our products and run by their amazing founder, Kelly, and our marketing team now that continues to expand with Linda Galloway, Cole Harris, Summer Orlano, Kendall Lowry, Kate Lynn is now working on some of this. So a big team. Thank you to our listeners and community. We couldn't do this without you. And that's it for this episode of Spilling the Tea on HR Tech. We hope it's been just the brew you needed to start the engines running this week. We'll be back in just 2 weeks with another pot of boiling hot HR Tech updates and insights.